What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today we are recording the metagame discussion for the Pokemon TCG New Jersey regionals coming up the weekend of May 21st, May 22nd. And there are also some regionals happening outside of North America. I believe Perth regionals and one other. And then Vancouver regionals is happening in Canada 1 week after New Jersey. So you guys might be watching this, and a lot of what we're talking about can be taken into account and can be valuable information for things other than specifically the New Jersey regionals, but that is what we're kind of focusing on today. So I have two guests with me here. We've got Mellow Magikarp and Rahul. I picked both of these guys. Not only do they perform consistently well at tournaments, but they also have their own YouTube channels. And Mellow's meta forecast, it was pretty brief but very informative going into the Indianapolis. And then Rahul also had a meta forecast that I listened to, and I enjoyed his takes on things. And Rahul also kind of just Rahul's group of testing partners and people he plays with also are all just collectively really good at metagaming. So I thought for these reasons, Mello and Rahul were great choices for today's discussion. As always, the channel is sponsored by Potown Store, PokemonCard.io, Beast Coast Pokemon, Card Trooper Games, and newly affiliated with Dragon Shield. You can find all the links for that stuff in the description down below, and also remember to subscribe to this channel for daily Pokemon TCG content. Now, Kevin and Rahul, in that order, why don't you guys give yourselves a short introduction before we get into discussing the metagame for New Jersey Regionals?
For sure. So my name's Kevin Clementi. You may know me better as Mellow_Magikarp on all the stuff. I've been playing for 4 years. My least recent finish, why I should be credible, is 12th place in Salt Lake City. And I'm not going to New Jersey, but I am going to Vancouver. So I am very closely paying attention to the meta right now.
Go ahead, Rahul.
My name is
Okay.
okay. Sorry, my name is Rory. I've been playing Pokemon for almost half my life. I keep doing pretty well at tournaments. I'm currently hard stuck top 64, but I happen to be the worst player in a very squad of very good players. So that is my accomplishment here.
Yeah, the regionals, everybody's like really trying hard right now. We finally have real life events back.
Yeah.
That I was talking to Grant Manley after like day 2 of Indy had mostly wrapped up, and I believe he got either top 32 or top 16 in Indy. But we were just talking
Mhm.
about how like the records in Indianapolis, like you had to try your butt off like to get top 64 or to get top
Yeah.
32. Like it was actually really tough. Whereas in the past, maybe some of those records at a lower attendance regionals with less rounds in day 2 would have gotten a higher placing. So really hard competition. Everybody's metagaming hard, trying to bring out their creativity, play the best because they've missed playing in real life so much. Um, so yeah, with New Jersey regionals coming up, approximated to be about 600 masters, so it'll be like almost half as large as Indianapolis regionals.
Yep.
So just a quick question on that, Rahul. Do you think that because you already know there's going to be about half the size of people as there were in Indianapolis, could have worded that so much better. The population of players will be about half for Jersey. Do you go into this tournament preparing any differently?
Um, I think it's similar, right? Like I think the numbers have to be like much more different. Um, than like a 600 and like 1100. I think are very similar in my mind because like once you're in day 2, it's a tough battle anyway. Like 10% of the field making it is still like 60 to 100 players on both ends, and it's a very difficult climb. But for example, Vancouver coming up, I think will probably have a field of like 300. So there's actually a legitimate chance that 18 pointers could make it through. So at that point, you can prepare differently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think the number has to be like probably like 350 for me to prepare differently.
Okay, so everything like 400 players and up, you're kind of preparing the
Yeah.
same. Okay, cool. Now Mello, you aren't going to Jersey, but you are going
Mm.
to Vancouver. So are you preparing for Vancouver differently than you prepared for Salt Lake?
Potentially. So I'm looking more towards like non-safe plays for Vancouver, and part of that
Ooh.
is I feel like with less people, you're more likely to hit those top players. And so it's less about countering the field and more about countering who are the people that I have to beat on my way to the top 16 or the top 8 or something like that.
Mm.
And in a larger tournament, it's less of that, and it's more of a. And anyone who looks at my limitless page, you just see straightforward consistency doing well, right? But that doesn't feel as good in a smaller tournament where it's like,
Mhm.
well, like 30% of the field is going to be people who know what they're doing. That's like a lot of people.
Yeah, as opposed to like the typical like 5% of the field you don't want to hit. In Vancouver, it might be more like 30. And in New
Yeah.
Jersey, maybe it only goes up to like 8-10% of people like, I do not want to hit you on day one, like let me get by day one with peace, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas in Indianapolis it was like it was very unlikely you were going to hit the people you didn't want to hit in Indianapolis
Yeah.
on day one. So yeah, that's a nice little gauge of the differences there. So my first question that I want to talk about today is just to kind of get a scope of where your guys' minds are at with the metagame. Um, which is the best deck in format? Is it Mew or is it Arceus and Teleon? I'm only giving you those two options because I feel like those are the only two options. But Rahul, do you think it's Mew or do you think it's Arceus and Teleon?
I think Mew, because every time I mean, I've been very scared to play Mew, and I just keep telling myself maybe this is the event I pull the trigger every single tournament. But I do feel like every time I play against a Mew, sitting across the table, I'm like, if that was me, I win this game.
Mhm.
And that thought has crossed my mind so many times. So I don't know if that's just like my personal bias here, because I played Arceus at 2 out of 3 events this season, and every time I felt like a lot of the Mew wins I've had are very undeserving.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if that's just a product of me playing way too much in this format, or Mew just being that powerful that it doesn't have to really be piloted by someone who's playing it perfectly.
How about you, Kevin?
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to go with Arceus
Ooh.
and Teleon for sure. And part of that is just it can do whatever it wants to. It's impossible to counter because you never know what they're going to have. So like Arceus and Teleon's incredibly vague, right? Are they running Sharon's Care? Are they running the Beedrill? Are they running, the attackers, the Ian Robb list? And I think just straight Arceus and Teleon, I am much more afraid to sit across from. If you ignore the fact that Mew VMAX, I could have someone who it's their first tournament ever and they absolutely steamroll me and 2-0 me
Yep.
because the power of the deck.
Right.
But Arceus and Teleon, I think, is the BDIF because it is techable for any meta, anything that you want to do with that deck. It can and will do every single game.
Yeah, so I like, I mean, it's convenient you both had you both chose one of the decks. You
Yep.
know,
Sure.
we didn't plan this beforehand or anything. Um but yeah, it's very interesting, and I've gone back and forth myself probably every week of the Brilliant Stars metagame because I've been playing Arceus and Teleon since the set hit PTCGO, since it hit PTCGL, but PTCGO since it, and I love Arceus and Teleon for all the reasons that Kevin listed, yet I played Mew to Indianapolis for the reasons that Raul listed. Like, there's just the power of knowing that like my turn one Meloetas go up just a slight bit if I'm playing just a little bit better than the average Mew player. Maybe people are preparing against subpar playing on the
Mhm.
side of Mew VMAX, and I definitely felt that in day one of the event with Mew VMAX. And then when I got to day two, I felt like I could no longer skill gap my opponents for the most part. On the side of Mew VMAX. Whereas with Arceus and Teleon, you kind of roll the dice in a different way. It's like, well, I can probably skill gap my opponents if I know this deck very well, but I can also get a awkward start that Arceus and Teleon gets, and then it doesn't even matter how well I play, and Mew VMAX will roll me. So it's kind of that trade-off between the two, and I think both are respectable answers for being the best deck because they both have reasons to be the best deck.
You only
Um,
got to sit up twice.
yeah.
That's
That is
um
true.
yeah, so now that we kind of talked about the two titans of the format, my second question is going to be specifically about indie and specifically about top 8 and more specifically about Arceus and Teleon. So Indianapolis was the largest event 2 weekends ago out of 3 events. The two
Mhm.
smaller ones happened in Brazil and Spain. They were both between 200 and 300 players, so different metagaming process. Again, the population of top players was a higher percentage there than it might have been in Indianapolis with over 1,000 players. But at Indianapolis, 5 Arceus and Teleon decks made top 8. With 2 of them in finals, so first and second were both Arceus and Teleon. What was your reaction to 5 Arceus and Teleon decks in top 8, Kevin?
it's the BDIF. Like, what's their reaction is like, well, maybe there should have been more, honestly. Also, not surprising because good players tend to go towards Arceus. For those who remember the Zoroark GX days, it was usually the BDIF, but also like even when Zoroark wasn't, it wasn't shocking to see a bunch of them at the top tables because it's what the best players were playing, and the best players playing a good deck tends to do pretty darn well.
How about you, Rahul?
I think it was pretty expected. I think the top eight was like a very expected outcome. I think Arceus, again, like Kevin said, like it's just better players usually tend to go towards Arceus because you have more skill gap ability on the board. You can play whatever text you want. Just look at Ian's list. Like you can just do whatever you want with Arceus. Like it's a pretty crazy ability.
Yeah, for sure. And I forgot my second thought there, so we'll go on to the next part of the question. So in within those 5 Arceus and Teleon decks, 2 of them were toolboxy lists, and I kind of categorize it as a toolbox variant when it doesn't have the full 4 Arceus Vs. When you see a 3-2 or a 2-2 line like we saw in Ian's and one of the other top 8 players lists. One Beedrill list, which was Isaiah, and also the same list that Rahul played. One straight water Arcanteleon, which was Pablo Mesa, and his list was the most bare bones Arceus
Yeah.
and Teleon list. No Crobat, no Zigzagoon, no funny stuff, just 4 DCE, 6 water, only 2 Ultra Ball, 2. So, like, it was very, very bare bones, and just reconfirmed for me that a good player with Arceus and Teleon can even get out of those awkward spots without your Crobat. You don't need the Zigzagoon to be aggressive because you'll just win by a war of attrition, things like
Yeah.
that. And then the 5th Arceus and Teleon was the one with Dark Energy, so like Hoopa V, a Baby Molt, and a Clara type deal.
Yeah.
Are any of these objectively better than the others? Or if we kept replaying top 8 over and over, would each of them get chances at winning? Rahul.
I think the finalists, I think both their decks are objectively the best for this tournament. I think given the meta read, I think between Ian and Isaiah, one of them would win every single time if you play it out. I think if you played it out maybe like 20 times, Isaiah would win more just because Ian's list has inherently more techie slots that lead to inconsistencies. Um, but I think that it honestly comes down to the coin flip and Arceus mirrors a lot, and both of those can capitalize on like the biggest thing about those 2 lists is they can play from not winning the flip. Like they can
Mm-hmm.
play an Arceus mirror from not winning the flip, which is really, really important. But I
Yeah, for
think the other
sure.
ones, like the straight dark, the straight Inteleon, like those will suffer greatly from losing the flip and mirror.
How about you, Kevin?
I think I'm right about on the same page where like I think they're all very good. I do think Ian's list was the best for the tournament. Obviously, I'm not biased because I didn't play the Beedrill or design the Beedrill deck. It was very good. It was absolutely genius. But I think Ian's was the best for the tournament. But I also think Isaiah and Rahul's group, the Beedrill deck was also incredibly good. And I think if we played out that top 8 and we played out even all of day 2 over and over and over again, and you also have to take away the knowledge too, right? That's
Yeah,
another big deal because I assume Rahul won a bunch of games because they didn't know the Beedrill was coming in game
sure.
1,
Yeah.
and I assume Ian won a bunch of games because they didn't know the Metagame was going to KO the Dunsparce in game 1. And so if you take away that knowledge and everything else, I think you're going to see those 2 decks come in first, second place a lot of the time for that tournament.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, now going into New Jersey, do you still think that the Beedrill list is the best Arceus list, or do you still think Ian's is the best Arceus list, or do those teched out lists lose a little bit? With Muse adding the second psychic energy in for a myriad of matchups, with Arceus's changing from a 4-6 energy count to a 3-7, and maybe putting the ordinary rod in. Um, with maybe Rapid Strike Urshifu coming back and Beedrill being pretty poor against that deck. And then Ian's list, just all those techs are now not surprise factors; they're just clunk factors now. So do you think those 2 decks are still the 2 Arceus decks on top, or do we revert back to a more smoother Arceus build for Jersey, Kevin?
I'm going to say Beedrill, no. There's a chance. It's one of those things where like I might be in a little like brain trust of people that talking to, but it's like once you kind of know it, coming. There's like stuff you can do around it and play around it, or there's stuff you can kind of come up with of like, oh, you play a big Parasol and Mew, and it's like, well, I guess that technically works. You know, it's like little jank like that. That's like, well, if you hit the wrong person who hits the right stuff, that feels a little worse. Versus Ian's list feels much more techable for the specific meta. Like if you look at his, I think it was top 4 Salt Lake City list, and then you look at the one that won Indy, they're not particularly far off. And I
Yeah.
think some subtle changes can happen. So I still think it's the BDIF. I would not net deck that exact 60 for sure.
Yep.
Part of the reason it's so good is you can change stuff. What would you change? I don't entirely know, but
Right.
I would definitely change something.
Right, yeah. Ian got top 8 at SLC and Nick Moffat got top 4, and they played one card different from each other, and then just took that deck and just said, okay, well, now we need to tech for this and that instead. So, you know, they changed a couple of things. Speaking on the Beedrill, now because personally I think Beedrill's still a, you know, a great deck. Arceus Beedrill was being played prior to Indy. It'll still be being played after Indy. It was just not as popular because, you know, Rahul's group of players have kind of a status around them of being very good, and then people want to play what they played because, you know, oh, Isaiah's cracked at the game, Bakari's cracked at the game, Rahul's cracked at the game, we'll play what they play. I still think that deck's good. I still think that deck's going to get people into day 2, top 32, top 16. But now the question is, Rahul, do you think that Beedrill deck gets people into top 8 at New Jersey?
I mean, for sure. I think this is like one of those decks where it's like, it was one of those decks that probably wasn't talked about too much and wasn't played as much. So, like from my perspective, it's like we kind of created a B problem that we have to deal with ourselves.
Right.
So
It was kind of a deck that should have been already being played more than it was, kind of
yeah,
thing, right?
like when you look at what happened at UIC, like I think the first thought for myself and a lot of other players was just, why did Beetle not do as well? There's a
Mhm.
lot of Urshifu. Who are the good Urshifu players? Well, that's us. Um, so if we're not playing Urshifu, well, who are we worried about?
Right.
So I think the deck will still be played. I think the same question is posed again, like who are the good Urshifu players? And again, it's us. And I think a lot of the Urshifus that did make day 2, like I think there was one that came in at 8-1 and then didn't even top 32 or something like that. Like it was pretty ridiculous how steep they fell
Yeah.
because Arceus players came teched out. Arceus players came ready to go. And Beedrill is still like really hard to play around if you don't build your deck specifically to deal with it. So if you're going into the tournament accepting that you want to beat Beedrill, you'll probably still 50-50 the matchup or be slightly favored because it's still an Arceus deck at the end of the day.
Yeah,
But if you don't go in with the techs, you will probably lose, which is what makes it so scary.
for sure. So putting all these Arceus and Teleon variants into an overarching category of Arceus and Teleon, what is the counterplay this week for what seems to be the number one archetype of Arc Intel decks? Excuse me. So Rapid Strike Urshifu is obvious, but Rapid Strike Urshifu got hate teched out of Indiana. You know, we had people playing Dunsparce, Manaphy, and Hoopa V all in the same deck. Not even just one of them.
Excessive, guys. A little bit excessive.
Like, so we had people playing all the techs. We had most people play, if they played a deck that didn't just already naturally beat Urshifu, they were playing at least one of the techs. Things like Sandaconda VMAX and Lycanroc VMAX also seem like obvious techs for Arceus and Teleon, but every Arceus and Teleon has Dunsparce, and if they have Dunsparce, they have a way to get back to Dunsparce. So, are we going to see people have, like, a deck that just wants to sit down and face Arceus variants all day long? Or does that just not exist and you play techs to have, like, ways to beat it, but it's not like, okay, just feed me the free Arceus and Teleons, Rahul?
I mean, there are those kinds of decks, and I mean, a part of me wants to make that call and pull that trigger because there's a couple of decks where if you say like I believe that someone else will take care of the Muse for me, that you could probably 100-0 Arceus or like get really close to 100-0ing Arceus with a lot of decks. It doesn't necessarily have to be fighting types. There are decks that just beat Arceus naturally by winning a war of attrition. But if you take that route, you were almost certainly getting clapped by Mew. Like it is very impossible to beat a good Mew player. They don't even have to be good. They just have to have you miss one turn of setup.
Right, exactly, yeah. I mean, one of the decks, I don't know if it's what you're alluding to, but I tested a lot of Togekiss VMAX going into Indianapolis. You know, but in testing, it felt good against a lot of stuff. And I'll talk about it now because I know I'm not pulling the trigger on it for New Jersey and I'm not going to Vancouver. But Togekiss sometimes just lost to, well, the Mew player got turn 1 Meloetta, or the Mew is playing Echoing Horn and I couldn't play around it in time, or my deck is just not as broken. So they just at some point get out of whatever kind of lock I'm trying to do. And so there's a lot of things like that. There's Togekiss, there's Metagross VMAX, there's Duraludon VMAX, lots of
Yeah.
things like that that can want to sit across from a deck that has a hard damage cap at 200
Yeah.
like Arceus does. But then, like you said, if they hit a variety of things, it's not going to
Just
work out well for them.
exactly.
But on the kind of the middle of the question I was asking, um, Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, it's like, on paper, great against Arceus in a vacuum. Do you think that it's going to, do you think the techs last from Indianapolis into New Jersey for Urshifu, or is the player base too fickle and they will take out some of the Manaphy's or some of the Hoopa V's? Personally, I think Hoopa V is much more lasting because it also is just another dark attacker to throw at Mew.
Yeah.
Whereas Manaphy is a dead card for most of
Yeah.
your day. I'll ask Kevin this first. So do you think the Urshifu techs will last from Indy to New Jersey?
I feel like the answer is mostly no, in that Dunsparce is mandatory. If you're going to play Arceus, well, okay, correction. It's mandatory if you're going to play any sort of sustain Arceus deck. If you play a single Sharon's Care, you want to play the Dunsparce, right? So that's probably going to be in every deck.
Right,
still.
because there's Zapdos, there's Lycanroc, Lucario. It's not just Urshifu.
Yeah. But the Manaphy, I think it's going to be one of the first things most people cut because it's generally a feels bad card. Like, it's incredibly squishy, gets KO'd super easily. It's like in the way. You don't really want it ever. You don't want to waste a scoop up net to get out of the active or anything like that. You start the Hoopa, you're like, well, I can charge it up and attack with it. So that's not the worst thing in the world. So I feel like people are going to be taking out their Manaphy's. That doesn't mean it's time for Jolteon for anyone who's listening and thinks that. But like, yes, I think people are going to start taking them out, but I don't think they're going to aggressively be like, I don't need any of these techs anymore.
Yeah, so they'll have Urshifu as a thought in their mind, but maybe take out the Manaphy. How do you
Yeah, and then maybe the Hoopa too, but
what do you think about that, Rahul? Now I know you've played Urshifu, so like if you knew everybody say out Manaphy Hoopa, that's just like okay, free will just sleeve Urshifu back up. But what are you expecting right now, 6 days out from the event, or five
Both of
days
those
if I can
cards.
do math?
I think my reaction is that 2 out of 3 will probably be played, but I think that if I'm looking to win the event, I mean, there was a lot of Hoopa. There was a lot of Hoopa. There was a lot of all 3 at Indy, but from community sentiment, I feel like a lot of those players did not make day 2, like that had all 3. Like I was genuinely like the first thing I did, I think last week when I got back, was literally go through every list that in Indy from PokeStats or whatever, and look at how many of the trifecta of Doom, as I like to call it, made it. Um, and there was not that many. A lot of the Arceus Darks that were like a game or 2 off of cut, they didn't play. They just played Dunsparce Manaphy. They were just like, that's enough. And I'm like, in what world is that enough? I don't know. I guess if you're only worried about Gustavo's list, then yeah, that's probably
Right.
fine. But
Yeah,
so
exactly. And I think between EUIC and Indy, like my advice as well was practice against Gustavo Urshi, because if you're playing against the field, you're either playing against somebody who knows Gustavo Urshi pretty well or somebody who knows one of the other Urshis not that well, and you'll beat them anyway.
yeah,
So I think it was fine to just play like Pablo Mesa played Dunsparce Manaphy Rod,
yep,
or Dunsparce Manaphy Claire, Dunsparce Manaphy Carrier, especially if you're playing like an Arceus deck with
Carrier is
double
good.
Big Charm, because the double Big Charm can also help against the Yoga Loop stuff.
Yep,
Um, but yeah, but like you're saying, not many decks did well with all 3 of them, and I think that makes,
yep,
excuse me, I think that makes sense because you don't need all 3.
yep,
If you're not playing against unless you're playing against an Urshi list that has it all figured out. If they have the grass attacker for the Hoopa V, or they have their double boss with baby Hoopa to be aggressively going after the Manaphy's or whatever it is. There's a lot of ways to build the Urshifu list to take care of the counters. It's just at the end of the day, is it worth taking care of the counters? Will you even hit the counters? And then can you beat the other stuff if you're taking care of the counters? There's a lot of back and forth that
yeah.
I went through
This
that week between EUIC and Indy, and I'm sure you did too.
Yeah, it was a constant. I think until probably 4 or 5 a.m. the day of tournament, we were still debating that. Can we handle it? Do we have the field? And I mean, I made the call, and Isaiah, coming off of his like most recent success, was very stubborn to shift off of the deck. But I mean, I was like, dude, you cannot, like, there's like everybody and their mom quite literally was playing like all three, and I'm like, we can't, like, I
Yeah.
don't want to work that hard.
You
Like, I don't
don't
want to
go
work that
into the
hard to win
tournament
games.
working that hard. Exactly. Like
Yeah.
that's like when people were asking why don't you play Mew V Max to so and so event, because I don't want to face a hate deck every single round. I don't want to face
A
Gengar
lot of
V
work.
Max every round, even though I can beat it. Now
Yeah.
now thankfully Gengar's a little gone, so people can play Mew in peace. But yeah, okay. So I think we've talked a good bit about Urshifu and the techs and everything, but it's confusing. It's a lot of, you know, have I gone too far? Have I metagamed myself out of playing the deck? Is it still good? Or, so final thoughts on just that part. Um, do you think that do you think an Urshifu can realistically make top 8 in Jersey?
I think that one of my group will potentially win the event, and Urshifu will be one of our top three choices for the remainder of the format.
Kevin, do you think Urshi can make top 8?
Oh, for sure.
Okay. Also, question I forgot to ask. Did you expect there to be an Urshi in top 8 of Indy? Kevin, then
No.
Rahul.
I would lean towards no
Okay.
on that one, but I don't think I would have been shocked if one happened.
Got it. Okay, so we already just covered question 4. Oh, okay, so similar to Rapid Trick Urshifu is Dark Box, right? Like, literally, if you take Dark Box and put a 2-1 Urshifu in, now it's Urshifu. I've been looking at Caleb Rogerson's seniors first place list from EUIC, and it doesn't have all the convoluted stuff that makes you have to work harder throughout the tournament or lose to prizing or lose to time as much. And it's much more of like a Dark Box deck with just a 2-1 Urshi. But if you take out that Urshi and you play Dark Box, like Stefan Ivanov wrote an article on with like the Rowlet, the Bird Keeper, talk about some people playing Shadow Rider Calyrex V for the 50-50 attack, Metacham Yoga Loop. Is Dark Box a viable deck, or is it just, should you just play Urshi if you're doing that?
As the biggest Dark Box fan in the world for like several formats, it's not the move. I was trying Stefan Ivanov's list, and every time it's just like, this is just worse than Ian Robb's list of like, hey, I've got the birds and stuff like that, or it's worse than Tord and Pedro's list of Urshifu. So it's like, you don't beat any good Arceus players with a single Zapdos. Like if you and your testing group are beating that, or if you're like, I went to my locals and I beat them, you're just beating people who are worse at the game than you are.
Right.
That's not
And you
actually
can get
what I
into
would go
day
with.
2 by beating people worse in the game than you are. You
Right.
can get into top
That is
32
true.
with that. You can get into top 16 with that. Now, if we're talking about getting into top 8 or potentially winning the event, that's where it gets dicey. But,
Yeah, I guess I think it's what are your goals for the
Yeah.
deck?
right. Yeah. Rahul, do you have any differing thoughts on that?
No,
Okay.
absolutely agree. My entire one sentence statement was going to be, you cannot beat an Arceus player with the brain.
Right. Next is Whimsicott a real deck? So Alessandro won Bilbao with it. Riley Holbert got top 16 with it in Indy. We know Frank got second at EUIC, and that EUIC surprise factor was very much worn off by the time Riley got top 16 in Indy with it. Top 16 with any deck really isn't anything to scoff at out of over 1,000 players. So does that cement Whimsicott as a real deck, or is it just a rogue that is now on the tail end of its career?
I'll say real.
Okay.
It's like it's fine.
Yep.
It,
I mean, I believed it was real. That's why Beedrill was so good for me. I think, like, I believed it was real enough to warrant playing Beedrill. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Beedrill seems amazing into that because they don't attack turn 2 without their double, right? So
yep.
okay, that's an easy one. Next, so Arceus Beedrill can be paired with pretty much anything, much more so than Arceus and Teleon can be. Lucario V-Star with Arceus Beedrill won one of the smaller events in Joinville, I believe, that we were just talking about. It got first in that event, but that was a smaller event. It didn't even have a day 2. It just had Swiss
Yeah,
rounds
just top
into a
8.
top 8. But Arceus Beedrill also got 16th and 17th in Indy, with the Dark Package plus Corviknight. Some of them got, I know Mike Morton played it with just the Dark Package, and some other people played it with just the Dark Package as well. Is this popular or successful? Will this be popular or successful enough to be its own deck, the Lucario version, or does it just fall into the pile of Arceus Beedrill plus XYZ? Oh, you're
Just a
muted, Kevin.
Oh, I muted myself. Cool.
Yeah,
I talked to Kevin Krieger about this,
Yeah,
so I'm gonna plug my own YouTube real quick and go check out
Good
the
video.
interview on that one.
yeah, great video.
He sold me on Arceus Beedrill, but he sold me on Corviknight and how powerful it is over the Lucario.
Hmm.
And part of it's the no weakness. The other part of it is it turns out 240 is a really good number to hit because that becomes 280 with a choice belt and a Zigzagoon ping, and it KOs every evolving V in the format. And that's incredibly powerful. So I think way before Lucario, I'd say the Corviknight deck seems way better,
Yeah,
at least in theory.
I agree. I don't even know if like the barrel aspect is like necessarily like what made it so good. I think you could have played like Arceus Bronzong and Corviknight, for example, too. Like take a combination of what Wes played, Wes Hollenberg, and what Kevin played. Like I really like the Corviknight. Like it's a very smart card. I think Lucario, like if there was a day two, I don't think that makes top eight. I don't think it wins the event.
Right. Yeah, Lucario does have its advantages. You know, if you don't have to pop Starbirth on turn 2, you have Aurostar that just does so much damage.
That's true.
If you boss KO their Dunsparce with Arceus and they don't have the retrieval next turn for the Dunsparce, then you just have free KOs on all their Arceuses with Lucario. You know, these are things that the Corviknight doesn't offer. Um, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that the Lucario V Star is fine, but the Corviknight VMAX makes sense, like on paper, I think.
Yeah.
Next, so the Sylveon Arceus deck, which was originally piloted, or I guess was the first time it was like kind of in the spotlight, was top 8 EUIC when Tai Nguyen played it. And now it's having some continued play and scatter success. My question for you guys is this deck just a pile of cards that are all good and you have little control over what happens? Or is it the real deal? It seems like the kind of deck that players in the highest skill bracket will not touch with a 10-foot pole because while it has a lot of options, you don't have much control over the options. Or am I just really off here and it's a great deck, Rahul?
I think it's high rolly, and like I don't see an actual world where you beat Mew is the problem. I think so. I don't think I actually ever mentioned this, but pre EUIC I like wasted a full 3 days on Sylveon because I thought there was a lot of potential, and I think I was actually using a list very similar to Ty because I think they were playing online events, and I probably copy and pasted their exact list like two cards off of what they actually played, and I was like, how does this actually set up? And I was like super high on it the first day when the battle VIP passes were working and everything was working. And I was like, yo, guys, this is broken. Like, I think I found it. And then Isaiah clapped me a bunch with Mew, and I was like, okay,
Right.
that
Yeah.
sucks. All right, let's put it away.
I went 1-1 in matches against it with Mew in Indy. And you know, the games I don't games 1 and 3 or 2 and 3 that I lost were just games where it's like, okay, I whiffed the power tablet for the turn 1 donk with
Yeah,
Mello, and since I whiffed that, now they just roll over me. But in the games where you don't whiff that, then you roll over them. So it's kind
yeah,
of volatile, but you don't really have much control over beating Mew. It's kind of you just
yeah,
have to sit there and watch them solitaire and see how the cards fall.
yeah. And I feel like at that point you can just play like a more consistent Arceus deck, and kind of like actually have a better matchup. Like I guess like the Sylveon, like and those big beefy attackers do give you a better, I guess like Arceus War of Attrition matchup in a vacuum. But I do think like now that Corviknight and like Lucario and stuff are being explored, I think those are just better options at the end of the day.
Any differing thoughts, Kevin?
Pile.
Kyle. Yeah. 3 VIP pass. Like, congrats to Ty and no knocking his deck building or anything, but 3 VIP pass just doesn't sit well in a regionals deck for me, so I don't think it's the one for me.
It's very cool. It's just
Yeah,
incredibly high rolling.
absolutely, yeah. And you know, it takes like understanding of the metagame to know exactly which like 2-1 and 2-2 lines you need to fit into your deck and stuff. It's just
Mhm.
after the deck building is where the skill is with that deck, I feel like. And then once you actually get into the games, there's a lot of things you can't control, which is what keeps me away from it. So at Indianapolis, players heavily countered Urshifu, while they probably should have been countering Arceus and Teleon. Now, what will players counter in New Jersey, and what should they counter? So so going into Indy, we talked about what did you call it, the holy trifecta of
The
text or
trifecta
something,
of doom.
the trifecta of doom, pretty similar.
The Bermuda Triangle.
So everybody had their trifecta with them. I definitely ordered a hoop of V and picked it up from Full Grip Friday night.
Yeah, I have 3 as well now.
I have one of each kind. So they brought the trifecta for Urshifu, and then Urshifu was not the deck they needed to tech for. It was Arceus and Teleon variants. So what is the deck that they will tech for in Jersey, and what's the deck that they should tech for in Jersey, Kevin?
I think they will tech for Arceus and Teleon, but I don't think they're going to do it well.
Is there a way to
And the
do it
reason that
well? Is my follow
that's what I
up.
was going to say. Like, we have been racking our brains, and I've talked to some like old timey players who are like, I'm coming back to Vancouver to break the meta like the good old days.
Right,
And then they keep messaging me, like literally every day, like, so what is this deck's weakness again?
right.
And I don't think that really exists. So I think people are going to come up with things that they think are going to help, or some things that are, oh, I'm going to add a third Sharon's Care for the mirror or something like that. And
Bro,
shout out,
see what
that's
you're
what we
trying.
did for Indy.
Hmm.
Uh, it was not good, but it's going to be stuff like that. So I think they're going to tech for that, and I think technically you should tech for it if there were actually a good tech.
Yeah, I think the problem is the techs make it 55-45 instead of like winning the matchup for you. Like we were talking about, like Galarian Zapdos with Cape. It's still not bad, but you have to also have a plan on how you're getting the Dunsparce out of there, and then how you're getting it out of there again after they bring it back. So there are techs, there are groups of cards that you can prepare, and honestly, teching like 3-4 cards for Arceus decks in general is not it's not bad, because there are like 6 different variants of Arceus, and you're going to hit a few of them. So if you have a tech that covers everything, it sounds great. So you think people will try to tech for Arceus and Teleon, Kevin? Do you think that's what they should be teching for, or should we go back to teching for Urshifu, or back to teching for Mew, or back to teching for whatever?
I wouldn't not tech for Mew. I guess the caveat of what should they tech for is you're still teching for Mew, because Mew is still a deck that exists.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not take those Mew techs out. If you take the auto loss to Mew, and Rahul talked about this earlier, I think you're just going to have a bad time.
Yeah, maybe one or two. If 50 people go in taking the loss to Mew and like autoing Arceus, somebody's got to make it, right? But like,
Somebody will slide through. Like,
yeah,
I think we did the math in our group. Sorry to cut you off. Like Slutsky wanted to do the math in our group to see how like our overall record against Mew is in the format, and it's like incredibly dominant. But we were talking about it, and like I think until like round like 9 or like round like 7 or 8 of EUIC, Slutsky did not hit a Mew like
mm-hmm.
between SLC and that. But I'm sitting here going, I've hit like an average of like 5 Mew a tournament, so I cannot like reasonably like in Indy, I hit 1 on day 1, and I was like, "Damn, I'm playing Beedrill. Where am I?
Yeah, where are
Beedrills?"
they?
And then in day 2, I hit 3 back to back to back and got rolled by 2. So I was like, "Okay, I changed my mind."
Yeah. Yeah. And that just goes to show, even if you tech for Mew, it's incredibly powerful, and you're never actually always beating Mew. That happened to me. I hit Eternatus VMAX round 1 of Indiana, and I 2-0'd it. And then of course he came back for revenge in round 11, and he beat me then. But even if your deck is full of dark Pokemon, nothing but dark Pokemon, you could still lose to Mew. It's that kind of deck. So Rahul, what do you think people will counter in New Jersey, and what do you think they should counter? The answer could be the same for both of those.
Yeah. I think we've noticed that I don't know how other regions have been operating. Obviously, I've not been paying super close attention to their meta shifts, but in America, it always happens to be that there's overreactions to whatever decks make finals. Every single time. I don't understand why everyone just like knee jerk reactions every single
They
time.
forget
So I think
third place through 8th place.
they just actually completely forget 3rd through 8th. Like everyone just goes, "What made finals? I need to tech for that." Like I've seen this from community sentiment, coaching reactions, like whatever in general. Like people are just very quick to jump the gun, and I think Beedrill is going to get overteched for. So I think Beedrill's still a very strong deck, and it's a very scary deck, but I don't think I'll see the same number of success whatsoever that it saw this past weekend.
Yeah, because
What
like 6
they
of you
should,
guys played it, and all 6 of you made day 2.
yeah, me and Xander got 64, and everyone else did better because I bubbled 32. Um, imagine having to win 10 games to bubble.
Yeah.
But then I think that the tech is exactly what Kevin said. You must still be teching for Mew. I think the moment everyone like releases their grip a little bit on Mew, it's just going to dominate the entire tournament again. Like we're going to see very similar results to what happened in Brisbane at the very first tournament.
Mhm.
We did see catcher Mews emerge as the I'm a known quantity, so I might as well high roll a little bit. Um, and I think there is merit to that deck. Catcher Mew with 2 Psychic seems pretty hard to beat for a lot of decks. Like
Yeah.
if they get the catcher heads on turn 2, it's one of those like, well, what can I do about this? And the answer
Right.
is nothing.
Yeah.
So
I talked
one or
about
two
this
of
on
those things do.
Twitter today, or today, the day we're recording this video. Like there's been times where I'm like, I'm really on catcher Mew, and then there's other weeks where I'm like, this sucks. I'm not playing catchers. Like, what am I doing? But it reconfirmed it for me after Indiana when I felt like I needed that extra chance at RNG in day 2 with Mew to get farther in like when my matches were closer and skill to skill from both sides of the table, I felt like I needed extra chances at RNG to kind of get a little further with
Yep.
Mew, and catchers could have done that for me, or they could have
Yeah,
not and just put me to the bottom tables even faster. So it's a
yeah, I
risk
mean,
and a reward with something like that.
yeah, 100% agree.
So before we move into more general discussion, are there any specific decks or archetypes or techs that we haven't talked about that you are either preparing to play against or expecting that they will do well?
For me, no. I still think Suicune should be doing better than it is, but if everyone else is like me, they're like, I'm not going to put all that time in.
Right.
But that's the one that always comes to mind where it's like, I feel like that deck should just be doing well right now,
Yeah.
and it's
Finn
not.
did day 2 with it. He was pretty upset that he had a Manaphy in his deck, so he played 59 cards. Because he did. But yeah, Finn did day 2 with it. Couldn't make the conversion any higher than top 128 though.
I think I'm similar sentiment. I think the format's incredibly fleshed out at this point. I think it'd be really shocking to see something crazy pop up. And if it is, it's like a everyone and like nobody like expected this kind of thing. Like Kevin mentioned Big Parasol earlier. Like someone's gonna play it, someone's gonna cheese a couple of games, but that Big Parasol realistically probably didn't do anything. It's just in there as a 60th card. Like that could be the exact scenario that happens this weekend.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't see the format getting shaken up anymore. I think people that are going to Jersey and Vancouver will either stick to the grain or find something that's so radical that we're like, oh, I didn't even know this existed.
Right, right. Yeah, and there's a lot of that that's been experimented with. You can only test so much stuff, but I think one thing that players definitely are knowledgeable of and are considering is Jolteon Memory Capsule and anywhere that can fit, because we're talking about 5 different decks or so that all fit into the category of Arceus and Teleon, and they don't function without Inteleon. So Jolteon Memory Capsule, Garbatoxin for Inteleon, and Drizzle seems good, and then it's just not as good in practice. You can pair it with Gyarados because of Get Angry. You can pair it with one of the Fernandez brothers played it in an IRL event wherever they're from, with Arceus Beedrill Dark stuff, and then just put in the 2/2 Jolteon Memory Capsule line, and it seems great. It's also 6 cards in your deck if you're playing the full 2/2/2 that are only for Inteleon decks, and you're not only going to hit Inteleon decks in day 1. Um, and also just Arceus Beedrill is pretty modular. You can put a 2/1 line of any VMAX or any V star you want in that thing. So I think we could see players do well with those kinds of things, but I don't think there's anything left that breaks the meta. There might be some innovative things that work better than others, but I don't think there's something that breaks the meta. And if there is, I haven't found it yet.
I want to go off Arceus Gyarados real quick
Yeah.
because I played it this weekend to a thingy. Like I'd been testing it a bit off and on, and I played it. There was like a mock regional at our locals,
Mhm.
like best of 3. Everyone's bringing their best decks, except I brought
Right,
Gyarados.
Arceus,
And
Gyarados, Beedrill, just before you start, that was my last deck for Indy that was like, okay, if this one doesn't work, I'm just sending Mew. That one.
I feel like my experience with the deck, even if people are watching, they're like Gyarados, I'm gonna fast forward. Like there was a lot that I learned about the decks that come from it.
Mm.
The first one, that specific deck, I got bodied by prizes every single game, and the thing is, it wasn't bad variance of prizes. It's that deck can't actually prize anything because the Jolteon memory capsule line is so big,
Mhm.
and because you have to play so many energy for the stupid Gyarados, you're like, I can't actually prize any cards,
Right.
or else I'm gonna run out of resources.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal.
Yeah, we
And then the
tried it with
Jolteon card.
1/1 Jolteon and 2 memory capsule. That's not good. But
Nope.
2/2 is also not good, and 2/1 is equally not good, and going higher than that is not good. Just cutting the Jolteon line is good. But the problem is if you play the Gyarados, because Gyarados has so much like value between its high HP, getting rid of energy, the 240 attack that we talked about with Corviknight, they get angry when they hit you, you can just hit them back because of memory cap. And then you have those 2 memory capsules in there, so you're like, we gotta just get the Jolteon and we gotta fit it in somehow. We already got the capsules, and then it works sometimes. So there could be somebody that gets the Jolteon memory capsule to work consistently enough and get lucky to have a pop off performance with it, but I wouldn't think it's going to just like overrun the event.
And one of the problems I ran into with the Jolteon memory capsule, not even the fact that it took up so many spaces and like you prize one memory capsule and now you can't use Get Angry, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. Just Jolteon in general is one of the things that I didn't like out of that list. Gabriel's list. Out of Gabriel's list was the 4 Marnie. The amount of times where like my opponent's dead drawing, but like I have to draw cards because Arceus sets itself up. And so I have to do something or else they're going to win before I win.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of times like, well, I have to Marnie you. And they're like, hey, thanks for the boss. Thanks for the Sharons. Like you're giving me 5 new cards when I'm dead drawing.
Yeah.
And so I think if you are going to play the Jolteon memory capsule or you're like trying it and it's like, oh, this doesn't feel super great. I think I would go down to like 2 Marnies maybe because
And bump
it
up the
feels like every
research.
time you have to, yeah, you just draw your cards some other way because Jolteon Marnie's good once. And
Right.
then you never
Then
want
we
to do
gotta
it
stop
again.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
So not a fan of Jolteon.
right. Did you have any thoughts on that, Rahul, or any other like
No, I mean,
VMAX
I've
techs?
tried so hard to make Jolteon work. I think like that was like one of my favorite things to try for a really long time,
Mhm.
and it just so many slots for so
Right.
little,
I think
and it
at
just
this
never
point,
ever worked.
most of us that metagame and devote our lives to this card game and stuff, we probably have all run through a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same text, a lot of the same things, and that's how we come to the conclusion and play the decks that we play. um,
Yep.
Next one, is Tool Scrapper underplayed right now, or are games just too fast that it doesn't get value in enough games?
I guess the question is, what are you scrapping? If your deck
Probably Big
like
Charm and Arceus Mirrors. I'm thinking if you have a card that hits 280, like Corviknight, like
can you tell me what that
Gyarados,
card is?
Corviknight maybe. Let's say Corviknight V Max. Let's say Lucario V Star because it does 240 plus Belt plus Goon.
I mean, if you have
I'm
all
gonna,
those, then sure.
yeah, if your deck very specifically wants it, but underplayed isn't should be in everything, it should be in next to nothing.
Yeah.
Here we go. I did not even know this was on the outline, guys. I completely forgot. Is Jolteon Memory Capsule worth playing to counter Inteleon decks?
No.
And if you're thinking, why are they saying no? Just imagine you just set it up and then the Arceus player goes boss KO and just goes back to business as usual. That's why. That's the short answer. I think we've kind of touched on this, but just a short answer to it. Can a deck with a bad Mew matchup win New Jersey? Or is Mew still too popular and oppressive?
Oh yeah, it can win. I think that if you can make it deep enough in the tournament, you'll probably won't hit enough Mews that can alter your tournament run because I don't think um good players. I won't say who, but there is one player in particular who is like world class that has gone into a lot of tournaments recently and done very well with a pretty bad Mew matchup because his logic is that there's no good Mew players in the field, and there never will be because all the good players will play Arceus or something different, and it's worked out for them very very well. And every time I think about my choices, I'm like, why can't I be that confident?
I think I agree with that. You can definitely pull out some wins against Mew, and it's popular. If you take a bad Mew matchup, you might also go 0-3 drop.
Yeah.
But it's entirely possible to win the event with a bad Mew matchup, just between outplaying maybe a couple that you hit and then just avoiding the rest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I only hit 2 Mews in 15 rounds, so like if two losses can get you into top 8, and then just don't get into the Mew bracket, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think I was on the lower end of hitting 2 Mews, whereas Rahul, I think you said you hit 4 in Indy.
I hit 4, yep.
Yeah, I think 4 was probably like what the average player hit that day, that weekend. Next, if you had to guess, well, this is also pretty conveniently placed. If you had to guess, which archetype would you face 3 copies of in day 1, and which would you face 2 copies of in day 1? If I told you you were going to hit 3 of something and 2 of something, Kevin.
So I'm going to plug myself again since you introduced me as a YouTuber.
Absolutely.
I've got a video on my channel where I break down the things I'm going to hit round 1, because that's how we approach every tournament. Like, how many of this would I hit? How many of this would I hit? And conveniently, I think you were going to hit about 3 on average Arceus and Teleon with Sharon's Care, and about 2 on average of Mew VMAX would be my guesses there.
Yeah, actually that video, like when when I get into like the 2 days before the event and I've overthought things so much that I've circled back to the beginning and then gone on even farther, I watched your video to ground me again. I'm like, okay, these are reasonable thoughts, Kevin. Thank you. Like, I needed to hear some like reality in my head, because I'm thinking, what if there's just no Mew? What if it's all Urshifu? What if it's all like, like and Rahul, same question. 3 copies of something and 2 copies of something.
The answer is, I think, the exact same as Kevin. I think if you're heading into the tournament, you have to think about it that way. I think I would say not Arceus and Talion specifically. I'd just say Arceus variants, because I think in my day 1 of India, I hit 5 Arceus variants, and 3 of them were non-Inteleon. I bet none of you can guess the 2 VMAXs that were paired with 2 of them.
Dhelmise?
I'm assuming not Gyarados.
No, both of those were wrong. One was Charizard, and the other was Rayquaza. So,
oh my goodness, yeah, that
those are really.
I wouldn't have put money on either of those.
I think I hit 1 Arc Intel, 1 Arc Bibarel Dark, 1 Arc Charizard, 1 Arc like Rayquaza, and like 1 Arc Duraludon. So Arceus is like Arceus plus friends will exist, and like people are all going to bring their pet deck, something that they've been whatever's working in their testing group, it's working. It's like they think it's working for a reason, and that confidence is enough to bring it. It's like the same reason people thought they beat Urshifu like for the longest time. So it is what it is.
I do have to go the opposite side of that real quick, because I wasn't at Indy, but my testing group, Grant brought Arceus B-Barrel that we had tested, hit 1 Mew the whole time, but hit like 7 Arceuses or 8 Arceuses between the 2 days, and it was everything but like 1 of them was Arceus and Teleon.
Yeah.
So the other side of variance does exist too.
Right.
Yeah. I think Arc Intel will still be like probably the most popular variant in the field. Like, I think if you combine like Arc Intel Straight, Arc Beedrill, and like Arc Dark all together, that will be the most, like, I think it will be more represented than Mew.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about metagaming for this event, because typically when you have that, it's like, well, we can't tech to auto win against 3 different decks, but these 3 different decks all play 4-3 or 4-2 Arceus, and they all play like 4-3-1-1 Inteleon, and then similar engines. And typically when you have a metagame forming like that, where you know that 3 variants are going to make up an archetype and they're all playing all these same cards, you can tech against them. You can build something that beats it, and that's what's so interesting about this particular one, because similarly to Zoroark, and maybe even more so than Zoroark decks back in the day, it's hard to find something that will beat Arceus Water, Arceus Dark, and Arceus Beedrill, even though they all share the same deck skeleton. So it's quite interesting. So if you're listening and you're in the same boat and you thought you were missing something, I don't think you're missing something. It's actually very hard to figure out what beats them, if anything. And also just doesn't auto lose to literally every other deck. That's an important caveat. And lastly, do you guys have any general advice, any tips for players starting or maybe even returning? Because I know there are a lot of returning players. I met a guy in Indiana who I played against, and his pop ID was smaller than mine, and he hadn't played since I think Diamond and Pearl sets were the newest thing. So like, there's a lot of returning players. Do you guys have any general advice or tips, Rahul?
Play slow. Like, not like slow play, but like just think about your actions, because there's a lot going on at once. Like, I've seen players like jump the gun with their Inteleon lines and stuff like that, and I think you kind of take each turn at a time, but you should also like think about the grand scheme of the picture. Like, I think the number one thing, I think Kevin has done an excellent job on his YouTube. I'm gonna plug his YouTube for him, where he like talks about like his lessons of the game and like price, like how to price map and stuff like that. And I think that is one of the most important things, specifically in this format. I think this format and next format, with all the options available to us, Next format is going to get even more complicated. So you're going to have to know how to prize map after turn 2. Like your first 2 turns, uncontrollable. I get it. You play the cards you're dealt. But after turn 2, you should know, what is my win con? How am I going to win the game? And once you start practicing that, your games will get a lot easier to visualize, and your games will get a lot. You will just skill gap your opponent at the table, because I guarantee you, so many players do not do this. They will just play the cards in their hand and then be like, I got unlucky.
I think for me, I would agree 100% with everything Rahul just said. But one of the other things, big piece of advice for anyone either newer or you haven't played IRL in a while, I've been getting really into the mental side of the game because there's a lot of stuff I didn't realize I do. And one of the biggest ones, 100%, you sit down, you chat with your opponent beforehand. That's good. That's part of going to an IRL Pokemon event. For the love of Arceus, do not tell them what you're playing. Do not tell them I hit this last round and it was a bad matchup.
Yeah,
don't give them that information. The amount of people who do that to me, I'm going to use it. I'm not above using the
Of
information you're not
course, you
supposed
gotta
to give
use
me,
it.
but
Yeah.
don't give it to me. Don't give it to your opponent. Don't be like, oh, I played against Rapid Strike Mally, such an auto win because I've got Crobat VMAX. Like, all right, sick. I already know everything I need to know off that one sentence. And I know you want to say it.
Right.
Hold it in,
Yeah.
please. It will win you actual games.
Yeah.
Just not saying that one sentence.
Yeah. And remember, there are like different populations of people that attend events. Some people go to events, they don't even know if they're going to win a game. They just made a fun deck. They want to go to a Pokemon event with their friends. We're playing Pokemon this weekend. They might talk about their, maybe they get a round 1 win. They're not a competitive player. They might talk about that with you. But yeah, if you're going with competition on the brain, definitely listen to what Kevin and Rahul are saying.
Don't do that.
So yeah. My advice personally would be wear a watch. Know when the round starts. So nobody wants to be the jerk that tells their opponent to play faster. But sometimes you also have to remind your opponent that there's a time limit on the round. We're in game 3. Can you speed up play? That's my biggest tip for everyone, is to don't feel like the bad guy when you're reminding your opponent to speed up a little bit, because it is part of the game.
Oh, and don't be afraid to call a judge.
Yeah.
Great.
That's always such a big. I'm not sure how this interaction works. I'm going to call a judge real quick.
Yeah.
Boom.
And in terms of slow play, if you do call a judge, always remember to say watch our pace of play, because then you could get called for I don't know what the exact term is, but they can get upset at you.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, and also, don't be afraid to call a judge. Again, you're not the bad guy. You're not you're not bullying your opponent because you're calling a judge. If you think something might be up, then something might be up. Call a judge. If it's not, okay, continue play. We're cool. So yeah, great tips and advice there. And yeah, closing thoughts, shout outs, Kevin, Rahul.
Closing thoughts are have fun. The game's fun. And then I'll let Rahul do a closing thought, and then I'll give shout outs.
Closing thought. I mean, Pokemon's good. Have a lot of fun. I love playing this game. I hope you guys do too.
Yeah, please. I hope everyone keeps playing, even if we don't get a Worlds invite this year, because TPCI gave us an impossible barrier. Come back next year. It's a much easier, I promise.
Oh yeah. This year is just, get in there, have some fun, learn what the tournaments are like. If you're brand new, nobody expects you to get an invite. No. Nobody expects you to even get close. Like, we're struggling out here without League Cup, some of us. So
Well, with all 3 of us here, we'll definitely prep you well next season if we do have locals and everything. So come back next season with a fresh look at things. Use this as like a warm up.
Yeah, exactly. And then go ahead and plug your stuff.
Yeah, so first off, shout out to my sponsor, Tabletop Village, located in Seattle, Washington. If anyone ever comes to Seattle, be sure to check out Tabletop Village. The owner is the nicest person in the world, and he will tell you where to go in Seattle for just anything. And B, the store is Pokemon only, essentially. There's like other stuff because they got to make some money, but it's like Pokemon only game store, which is everyone's dream. So check them out. Check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/mellow_magikarp, the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/mellow_magikarp, the Twitter, twitter.com/mellow_magikarp as well.
Awesome. And Rahul?
Very good. Very clean. I'm not that clean. Shout out to my one and only sponsor that I have right now, which is Dragon Shield. Very happy to be using them. I only use pink sleeves. I'll be saving a lot of money. A lot of money will be saved. I can eat food again. But check out my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Rahul Reddy. Check out my Twitter, twitter.com/theflea with 4 E's at the end of it, where I post terrible takes and sometimes try to be funny. But besides that, I don't stream or anything anymore because I've been very busy. But I will plug my coaching on metafy.gg/theflea or Rahul Ready. One of those two will work. Coaching is not like it's not like an admittance of defeat or something. Like whenever I test, like the reason I've been getting better in an incredible pace is like the players I surround myself with is basically free coaching for me. So if I'm admitting that I'm not as good as these guys, there should be not, your pride shouldn't be the one holding you back. Like everyone improves from coaching, and I think it's great.
Absolutely.
I got coaching when I first started. Highly recommend it to everyone.
Yeah,
I
it's like
think
a fast track to getting better.
yeah, I think I was joking with this about Isaiah. Like when after Limitless played Urshifu and we were considering it for UIC, I was like, "Do you think I'd be giving away too much if I booked a session with Pedro?"
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for lending your time tonight to the discussion, and thank you everybody who came by to check out the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for daily Pokemon TCG content, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.